Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Check. Today, Paul is talking with best-selling author Sayre G. Sayre is widely recognized as a researcher, author, lecturer, activist, and educator on natural health modalities. He is the founder of GreenMedInfo.com, the world's most widely referenced evidence-based natural health resource, as well as the co-founder of StandForHealthFreedom.com. He is also the author of Regenerate, Unlocking Your Body's Radical Resilience Through the New Biology.
Hi, everybody. Today's a very special day. You will get to hear me dialogue with one of the brightest minds in holistic health that there is today. Sayre G's deep knowledge and wisdom on a wide variety of topics that are important today stems from his own healing journey, which began in his childhood. Failing to gain relief from standard medical approaches led Sayre into a deep exploration of alternative health solutions that sparked a fire with him that burns bright today. Sayre G and his wife Kelly Brogan, MD, are the founders of www.GreenMedInfo.com, my go-to site for current science on natural healing and to gain the wisdom of many of the world's leading experts in many fields, including the deep truths behind the pandemic we've been experiencing. Today, Sayre shares his journey. We discuss the pandemic and consider the plandemic behind the illusions being used to program a susceptible public. We get into some of the extremely interesting research and concepts in his amazing new book, Regenerate, such as the amount of energy available in any cell in our body and within our body itself. We talk about how spiritual masters have demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can tap into an infinite wellspring of energy, and some don't even need to eat. They can live on breath alone. We finish with a dialogue on how the cosmic inflow of energy and information and its influence on the gestation and modification of species may be a possible explanation for the punctuations and evolution of many species that cannot be explained by Darwinian theories of evolution. If you like cutting-edge information and listening to a wise man, then you will love Sayre G and his new book, Regenerate. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. I'm super excited to have Sayre G, the founder of GreenMedInfo and the author of an excellent new book I'm excited to talk about today called Regenerate. His work is profound. His website, GreenMedInfo, is my go-to source for top-notch quality information by reliable experts on all the issues of COVID, health-related, and pretty much everything that we need to know so that we can work together to make better choices and function as a democracy to create a world that is more democratic, safer, and freer for all of us. So, Sayre, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Paul. I love your work. You're sort of like a living legend among people I highly respect and have for years. So it's a great honor to be here with you, really.
Thank you very much. I'm still living the legend part. I think that might happen when I die, but I appreciate that you enjoy my work and we have that bond. I think our values are very much in alignment from everything I read of yours and all the discussions I've heard with you. So that's lovely. You know, I'd love to hear an overview of your developmental background. What has your life path been, sources of education and inspiration, and the influences that led you to being the man that you are today, focusing on the things that you do?
Wow. Well, it's a great question. I think at some point we all are called to ask the same question. And, you know, what came up for me in preparation was really pain and suffering. That was how I came into the world. Not to say I'm special in any way, had some special burden, right? But that's literally my origin story. Having been bronchial asthmatic at 6 months of age, they injected me with adrenaline to ostensibly to save my life from, you know, these asthmatic episodes. And so my early years were really, in my own recall, quite nightmarish. Like I was depressed. I didn't want to be here. You know, it was often fight or flight kind of energy. And felt very isolated for most of my life. So it wasn't until later when I started to open up to what some people might call the spiritual world that I had a life reset and was able to really call in a kind of enthusiasm that now, you know, I value above so much, you know, to realize that life can be beautiful, that we can be infused with regenerative energy. You know, it's very, you know, it's really that's sort of my origin story in general. So struggling with health and disease and having a really challenging experience with the allopathic model. I think that's what led me to dedicate a good portion of my life to advocating for natural solutions, if you will, and outing collusion among industries that really don't necessarily want us to be healthy. They want perpetual customers on membership models for pharmaceuticals, basically. That's pretty much been a good portion of my life's work.
Yeah, I think I share something with you there. I had asthma as an infant and had to be tented and had issues with asthma till I was about 16, I think. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hip to that sort of experience. And it's interesting because, my experience of working with a lot of healers and shaman and people that are quite evolved in and focused on helping others in the world is that a grand majority of them come through quite challenging childhoods and painful experiences with health issues quite often, which I think really initiates us into the experience so that we can have empathy and compassion for others and have a clear sense of where we might be of service to help solve the riddle that has, encapsulated us in our childhood.
Wow. I totally agree. I mean, that's beautiful because now, yes, all of that dark material, the quote pain and suffering is what has enabled me to connect to others whose plight, in some way I hope to affect by giving them information so that they can then consent to procedures that, as an infant, I didn't really have a choice. So for me, that's been a big part of my work. And I also acknowledge that, when you are undergoing, coming into the world, just the birth moment itself, unfortunately, because of the way that we bring children into the world is highly traumatic. You could just look at circumcision. I might have had a natural birth, but something as simple as that or vaccinating may induce trauma, which then causes us to evacuate our soul. And then we can't connect empathically. So yes, there's an opportunity. We all have suffered, whether we know it or not, deeply. And I think many of us, and I could speak from my own experience, for a decade, I've dissociated from my soul and, just operated within programming and expectations from the outside in. And it's a constant struggle. It can, at any moment, I can, have my back issues come up and feel like a victim. And then before you know it, I'm self-medicating with food or Netflix. And then suddenly my soul isn't really, present. So, it's constant work, as I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, it's a spiritual growth, and the growth of our levels of consciousness is a, perpetual and potentially infinite process. And because consciousness requires polarity, it's pretty much a guarantee that no matter where we're at in our life, we're going to, engage some kind of challenging polarity, or we get too passive and we just stop growing. And I think that's really a big part of the challenge in the world today. So many people are being so pacified by drugs and video games and phones and media that they're really not thinking for themselves anymore. And they're not really doing what's true to their heart. They're doing what everybody else is doing based on what's in fashion or in vogue, or, who's the famous athlete's shoes you're supposed to be wearing. So we've kind of created this, as you know, when I say we've allowed it to be created a blanket pacifying organization, or a blanket pacifier for humanity, which unfortunately makes it real easy for the people that have agendas that are not something that we all probably want to participate in, such as global vaccination or, tracking people with chips or 5G systems. Any of the things that we should all be looking at democratically and really thinking about constructively are being largely ignored because people are so pacified and diverted.
Amen. Yeah. I mean, the way I see it is my own experience was, it's holofractal to a degree, right? System-wide, there has been a very organized effort to create certain types of trauma it's been installed within us at birth. And then there's these entire institutions erected around that. And if you look at it historically, I think the Rockefeller Foundation and that organization has, installed an educational system around those traumas. They've co-opted medicine, where now we think we need chemicals to be healthy and that natural substances are dangerous. And then, right? I mean, it's absurd. And then you look at the monetary system with the petrodollar, talk about toxicant-based currency, and just the whole superstructure is, in many ways, dependent upon us being traumatized. So, in that sense, my journey into natural medicine, advocacy, health, freedom was, I think, by necessity. Also, it required I opened my eyes to the larger structure that continually repeats these unfortunate events in individuals. So.
Yeah, I'm curious. You're obviously you have a pretty significant depth of knowledge, because I've read a lot of the things you've wrote. I've read quite a bit of your book with the minimal time I had. Knowing that I was going to interview you, I was forcing myself to get your book out early in the morning and read through and let my soul guide me to the sections that I needed to, get to interview you. So I was kind of hip to the general message of the book. But I'm just curious, what are some of your sources of education and inspiration as far as, maybe key people that influenced your way of thinking?
Oh, thanks. Well, it's interesting because I have to give my family credit because honestly, I was, had learning disabilities when I was young, and I really wasn't someone who necessarily absorbed a lot of information. I was actually more inclined to art out of sheer boredom. And, instead of paying attention to the teacher, I would just scribble all day, and I didn't have friends. I was pretty much isolated. And so I ended up getting a invitation to Mason Grossley Art School at Rutgers as a byproduct, apparently, of these boredom-induced skills. And then only later, did I become interested in literature and all this. But my father was the type of intellectual that just by his nature sucked all the air out of the room. He was so charismatic and brilliant and philosophically just so compelling, even though he was sort of a real hard scientist. My mom was a reference librarian. My sister was an activist / hippie, turned me on to the Grateful Dead, which, that era of my life right there, late high school. Wow, what an eye-opener that was, that whole experience. So I am a byproduct of my family in that respect. But I think, looking now back 47 years, I acknowledge I came in with a certain natural inclination to know certain things, because clearly, like from the outside in, I have a degree in philosophy. I wasn't formally trained in nutrition, science, medicine. And that is often used as a way to ad hominem me. But when it comes down to it, it's been 15 years looking through hundreds of thousands of studies now, just because it was my passion. And I index them for everyone to use through GreenMedInfo. So in a way, it's just I'm self-taught. But I do believe that was my soul's intention and or destiny to become someone that in this space, at least, people do look for information from on these topics.
Yeah, well, we share a commonality there. I only completed the 9th grade myself.
Really?
So I hated school, and I did well in topics that I enjoyed, like physical education and biology and auto mechanics and any of those things, but I didn't do well at all in things like English or history or French or any of the subjects that were in school. But I found that I couldn't get answers to my questions, so I lost faith in teachers, and I found class so damn boring.
Yes.
And I couldn't see how I couldn't see how there was any practical application to, like, how am I going to make money with this stuff? So the things that I saw as practical inspired me, and I got good at them. I was, a very skilled mechanic and things like that. So I think some of our souls come in with this inherent boredom of this scholastic system because we're here to think outside of the box. And if we we're too aligned with it, we'd be too susceptible to programming, and our viewpoints would be limited to the social consensus, which is what we're here to heal.
Absolutely. And, on some level, just looking at it through the lens of quote, mysticism, is that any moment, like any experience of a natural phenomena, should potentially reveal near infinite amounts of information, experience, sentiment. And that's how I've always truly lived. Like, the things themselves teach us. And when I did end up going to school and focused on philosophy, I focused on phenomenology, which was focusing on going back to the things themselves, right? Experiential learning. I mean, everything is always already there to be revealed. It's not that different from what you hear through, sort of orthodox Zen rhetoric, which is obviously not the same thing as living the thing itself either. But so I think we're on the same page. I don't know that we need the kind of highly abstract pedagogical learning. Certainly, it doesn't help us to survive. We don't learn survival skills, which a lot of us with this impending tidal wave of the COVID psyop are going to be forced to experience soon, in my opinion.
Yes, yeah, it's we'll get into that in a little bit shortly. Personally, I'd love to hear an overview of your spiritual philosophy and how do you describe what your highest source is and how life works for you from a spiritual perspective. In other words, what is your spiritual philosophy and what's important to you as a human being from that perspective?
That's a great question. So, okay, one way in which I would describe it is that, everything is completely an accident, arbitrary, seemingly meaningless, like in a sort of like Newtonian Cartesian model. And then simultaneously, everything is infinitely, designed. It's completely like God, like performing miracles. So I accept both realities as true, even though they are mutually exclusive. And that is the paradox, which should theoretically totally paralyze our mind, as if we've consumed some pufferfish venom, so it's sort of like a way of accepting the ego is really not going to lead us to the truth. And that's challenging when we're relying so heavily on communication, right? And
yeah.
Yeah, so I know this. I pick it up immediately. There's when wisdom doesn't speak, and I'm even doing it right now, sounding smart about this, right? So it's like there's really nothing to do. I mean, there's some basic fundamental trust I have in the universe, so to speak, and this sounds new agey and bypassy, but that everything is perfect, even the very things that I completely hate and want to fight against. I have to acknowledge some part of this is just Lila, it's play, it's samsara, it's karma, it's all being delivered perfectly. So I guess it sounds like just a mix up there of concepts, but I guess because I've always been drawn to Zen literature. I spent time as a resident of a Zen monastery, so I have tried to experience, the thing that can't be pointed to. But then again, I believe we all do that every day. Again, washing dishes, having this conversation, it's all God, and it all really doesn't appear to be so either. So,
Yeah, well, the deeper you go into God, the more paradoxes you run into. And I don't think anybody can really approach a full understanding of God because God is the source of mind itself and mind requires duality, but God's a unity. So the only way you could understand God is to become a unity and you would have no questions to ask and nothing to know because you would be everything and nothing at the same time. So there's the ultimate paradox. And when people aren't mature enough mentally to deal with a paradox, then they just make up stories and believe them.
Absolutely. I mean, we're on the same wavelength. For people listening to connect to this, because I think it's very difficult to do it from the outside in, I can share that when I first experienced, I won't specify the technology. You could call it surgery or, plant medicine. There are many ways you can get hit on the head by a rock and go there. But when I was able to experience what I would call the in-between, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead calls it the Bardo, then I understood like what we're experiencing right now as ordinary, boring reality at times. I am so grateful it exists because there's an eternity of experience just a heartbeat away from us, and we'll probably experience it when we pass on to the other side, that it is, you're infinitely more awake and aware, and it is something that can feel like hell or complete ecstasy or heaven. And we can experience it here on earth without any kind of means, like without a drug or without a traumatic experience. But because I've had that experience, I know now that this is an illusion. Before having that experience, which was around 17 for me, I was, raised an atheist, scientism type of individual, and I was aspiritual. And it's what a nihilistic, place to live. And after that moment, I understood that that's not what's going on, and it's just not how things are. So anyway, I'm just trying to give people a sense that you can experience this other realm, but it isn't necessarily just this beautiful, happy place. It's a tough thing to try to integrate into this experience.
Hi, everyone. If you study Sayer G's excellent work and all the information he and Kelly Brogan, MD, share on GreenMedInfo, you'll find many excellent reasons to eat certified organic food. Organic foods have several times the nutrient density of commercially raised foods, and studies show that we reach satiety much quicker due to the density of nutrition. If you'd like to add real certified organic nutrition to your diet that's easy to use, fast, and nutritious, there's no better place to start than with Organifi. Organifi offers a wide variety of excellent, good-tasting, easy-to-prepare superfoods, protein powders, and drinks that my family, friends, and clients use regularly. You can taste and feel the nutrition right away, and I know you'll love Organifi's great products. Go to Organifi, Organifi.com, and at checkout, use the code CHECK20, all caps, that's capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20 to get your 20% discount. To get to know Drew Canole, the founder of Organifi, listen to my Living 4D with Paul Chek episode number 64, Drew Canole, UBU. I think it'll be obvious why I really love this guy and his products. Enjoy.
You've reminded me of a couple of Jung's very potent quotes in regard to some of the things you said. Jung said in regard to atheism something quite profound. He said, something must be real before it can be rejected.
Exactly. That's exactly.
And then when people used to ask Carl Jung, how do you experience God? He gave quite a profound answer. He said, whenever I'm really irritated.
Wow. Yes, right? I mean, because, yeah, go for it.
Most people don't know what he meant, but he's saying that when you're irritated, you're being triggered to be more consciously aware of what you're creating or what's happening. Mm-hmm. And most people say, God damn it, or what the fuck's going on here? Fuck. And Jung was saying that's when it was his reminder that at that moment, he needed to be paying more close attention to the powers of God to create within himself. And he could either fall into the unconscious and get sucked down into the vortex, or he could rise up and be more open to what's really going on.
I love it. I mean, it's like saying we're both God in terms of and this is highly obviously triggering to those with conventional religious backgrounds, as it should be, but unless it's understood for what I mean, which is that we do create our own experience, which again sounds like new age, bullshit, but it is true in my experience. And we're a worm, literally, like we're literally a worm. And even that metaphor is profound given the post genome era we live in terms of we have no more protein coding genes than an earthworm. In fact, I think they have more than us. So anyway, that's exactly. This is when you take the red pill and you realize that you actually have absolutely no power and both absolute power, or that it's all being written for you, your life, especially when you're on your soul's trajectory, and yet you have to write it each and every moment. The paradox is the best way to describe what life really is when integrating spiritual and physical, emotional, all the layers, in my opinion.
Yeah. I tell my students, I always ask them a question to set them up for the point I'm going to make. I say, if God is love, how many of you believe that God could only be unconditional love as God? Wouldn't that be the highest form of the expression of love and therefore the most godly? And everybody says yes. I say, well, by definition, if God is unconditional, the mathematical equivalent of that is zero. And if God is zero, that means everything that you see around you, from the universe to the stars to the moon and the planets to your very own life, is a virtual reality. Because if source is zero, then everything emerging from it is virtual. And they sort of kind of look at me mystified. But I say, before you write that off as something you can't understand, how many of you have gone to a movie like, Star Wars or any other movie where you found your heart rate speeding up, or you found yourself getting mad at somebody in the show, or you were scared to death and sweating? I say, well, that's a virtual reality. And you're basically engaging a virtual reality while you're in what you think is reality. But if God is a zero, then everything being projected as the experience of reality is a virtual reality. And that's exactly what it means when you use the word Maya, the illusion.
Well, that's beautiful, because those who came up with the term, right, the Vedic or in Hindu tradition, they came up with zero theoretically first, right? So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you're saying.
So,
very interesting.
I could talk to you on these topics all day, because those are my hobby, and I spend tremendous amounts of my time investigating that. It brings up a thought that I wanted to share with you.
Yes.
Jung is really, as you know, one of the master of archetypes, and the first archetype that's the root of consciousness. I believe archetypes are the root language of consciousness, and the first archetype in the Jungian system, from which all others emerge, is the imago Dei, which means our image of deity. And Jung says regarding the imago Dei, it's unclear whether our image of deity creates us or we create it.
I love that. I really love that. See, you're hitting onto something so profound ontologically that I think, I would like you to continue, going down that direction there. I'd love to learn more of what you think on that.
Well, really, what it all boils down to is belief systems. The word believe means be live, make anything live. And as soon as you're thinking it, it's live, because life itself is movement, and thoughts have to move or they can't be comprehended.
Yes.
So what Jung is saying is that the idea of God is the concept of source itself. And therefore, anything you're programmed with as a child to believe that God is becomes part and parcel the contents of your imago Dei, or your image of deity. And since God is the first principle, almost all belief systems, be they legal systems, social systems, languages, are expressions of really the root concept of religion, which is, how are we experiencing each other, ourselves, and life?
Yeah.
So what he's saying is, it's impossible to distinguish whether your programming and beliefs about God create God, or whether God created your beliefs.
Yeah, it's probably like some kind of toroidal, biosemiotic system. I love this because I've always thought, and others have previously, that anything you imagine is real insofar as it's an imagined phenomenon. And so we give the prana of our belief, which is something that this gentleman, James True, has written about, to these structures, and we vivify them or breathe life literally into them. And so that power is, and I see this in medicine all the time, right? That's the basis for the placebo and nocebo effect. It is so vast and powerful that arguably it is the substrate for the vast majority of all effects attributed to natural and synthetic medications. It's just this simple power that we wield, that we obviously project onto external systems and believe that, we don't create or co-create at the very least. So yeah, I think we're on the same page.
Going back to what you were just saying about the imago Dei concept I was sharing, there's an old saying that's quite profound. Infinity is zero with a twist. And so what you were talking about earlier, really what the symbol that popped up in my third eye was a Mobius strip. Are you familiar with a Mobius strip?
Absolutely, yes. It's like a
there you go.
Two-dimensional toroid, yeah.
Yeah, so essentially, if the Mobius strip represents the mind of God, whatever we write on it comes back on the other side to be our reality.
Yes.
So our internal reality expresses itself on the other side of the Mobius strip as what we see in the world, which is why all the great spiritual teachers and leaders of healing say, if you change your belief, you change what you see in the world and what you experience in the world.
Yes.
Which is, I think, really what GreenMedInfo is largely helping people to do, is reevaluate their belief systems to ask, is it really true? And is it bringing us to a place of sustainability?
Wow. Well, I love where you're going with this, because, I see what you're saying. I feel like, okay, the church presently is scientism-based medical monotheism, right? There's only one God, and it's obtained through the Holy Scripture of peer-reviewed, published research, and obviously it's administered by these priests of the body, and that's why GreenMedInfo exists. It's to dislodge and help people to understand that the Scripture actually does validate natural and does point out that their synthetic wares are toxic, but it's still part of that same sort of basic level. So I appreciate that you're connecting it to that, but I do feel like there's limitations to what we do. I mean, with GreenMedInfo, there's methodological bias, of course. I'm picking out just those studies showing the benefits of natural substances, and I'm also pointing out the ones that are showing vaccination, mammography, statin drugs are harmful. And it's done intentionally because if you look at the way peer-reviewed published literature works, is there's a profound downward pressure to keep research unpublished that shows that, for example, statins cause over 300 adverse health effects, all of which we've indexed on GreenMedInfo. And then there's a profound pressure to push out studies showing that those chemicals are actually really beneficial and natural substances are absolutely toxic and unsafe. So it was a way to cause a counterbalance, right? But it's not yet fully, I think my work is, there's still work to be done, a lot of it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to my mind. One, the placebo effect is quite powerful. I've seen studies saying it's between 34 and 68% effective, depending on the person or population you study. And the placebo effect falls directly in line with the structure stage of consciousness called the magical structure stage. Are you familiar with the structure stages of consciousness?
Yes.
So in Gebser's model, it starts with archaic, then the next level is magical, then the next level is mythical. The magical and the mythical in Ken Wilber's model make the traditional stage, which is where the fundamentalist religions are at. Then from there, in Gebser's model, you go to mental, but in Wilber's model, you go to modern, which is people, for example, that create their own spiritual philosophy out of a variety of religious ideas, so they become more open-minded. Then in Wilber's stage, you get to postmodern, which is still in Gebser's mental stage. And then the next stage is integral. And really, GreenMedInfo, in my opinion, is operating at the integral level, which transcends but includes all the previous levels. But the point I'm making is magical thinking comes from the time in our developmental history when we were very fused with nature and we had not developed very much concept for abstract thinking or thinking outside of the box or rational logical. We were very in tune with animals. And so we, for example, could sense very deeply what a lion or an animal or what a certain sound from a crocodile meant to your survival. Mm-hmm. And so yes. In the magical stage, this is where shaman largely operate at, especially traditional shaman. And that's how they found the formulas for, various medicines like ayahuasca. And I remember seeing a study where a scientist investigated what the mathematical probability of a shaman figuring out which plants had the key ingredients to make ayahuasca. And it was in something like the many, many billions or even trillions to one that would have happened by chance. So at the point, the research suggests that there had to be some truth to the fact that there is a language of communication between the beings of nature, be they plants, animals, minerals, or trees. And so the placebo effect really is inherently a magical structure of consciousness, but the fact that it's so powerful is really important because it says that the magical level of consciousness is very, very real. And when you look at all sorts of studies, I've seen numerous documentaries on the different rituals and techniques that spiritual teachers use to do things like, walk on fire or pick up burning objects or put swords through their body and not bleed and heal instantly and be able to, function on breath alone and things like that. So clearly there's mountains of evidence. And I've done a fire walk myself, a legitimate fire walk. And, we were introduced to a process of hypnosis that we used on ourselves.
Wow.
And then we're given a chant, and the chant was cool moss, cool moss. So instead of seeing fire, you looked at the fire and you programmed yourself to believe you were walking across cool moss. And interestingly, I saw a lot of people that got scared partway through the fire walk, and it was probably 30 feet across, 2,600 degree coals. And anybody that lost their ability to stay focused on the fact that it was cool moss immediately got burned, and you could smell burning flesh all over the place. There was probably 5 or 6 ambulances treating people.
Wow.
But,
yeah,
having done all sorts of wild and crazy things as a paratrooper and motocross racer and many other things where I had to keep my mind totally focused or I'd be dead,
wow.
I think it gave me the ability to stay focused. And my philosophy was, Tony Robbins was who was putting it on. He was a friend of mine. I used to be his therapist for a number of years. And so he's only 2 weeks older than me. So my philosophy was, if Tony can do it, I sure as hell can do it. So,
nice.
But there's just, I'm giving you an example. I was able to use a placebo to overcome 2,600 degrees of heat, which would instantly burn human flesh. But clearly the mind is more powerful than the elements themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think even the term placebo can be misleading, at least from the colloquial understanding. Like, for example, when we receive a, quote, placebo of, let's say, lactose-based homeopathic, in many ways, there's a number of things going on. Like, so our first moment and act of nourishment was, through breast milk, was both thermic, emotional, informational, spiritual. Every imaginable form of nourishment occurred when we put our mouth to our mother's breast and had that first lactose-rich squirt of milk. So there's something like even the Eucharistic miracle is in many ways a reproduction, I believe, of that primal moment. But when it comes to the way we're born into the world, literally we are separated in a way that doesn't have to be violent, but it might feel that way to most of us, is this existential rift, this wound. The first dis-ease we feel and ease we feel is when we are able to conform and latch on to the mother. And so that's the substrate for my understanding of what the placebo is really about. And nocebo is that ultimately we are born to really give our power over to our mother and eventually father and our larger community. And so we're structured actually into dependency. And so the prana belief, if you will, or the healing elixir and energy of belief is, it comes from within, actually, especially as we individuate, clearly, not as infants. We'll always need the dyad of the mother, but then we lend it to the priests of the body, or the sorcerers or black magicians of allopathic medicine, which, by the way, pharmacia literally means sorcerer and poisoner. And in fact, pharmakos is a more ancient Greek term for a human sacrifice, symbolically and literally carried out. So what we're seeing, of course, with the rise of Pharmageddon, the transnational corporations, right? The grand sorcerers have literally put the entire world under this spell called Covid19 And it's because we're consenting to it. We've given up our power. It's happened through so many generations of trauma that we don't even think twice. We really think invisible particles out there are so deadly that we have to shutter in our homes, give up all our liberties, etc. It's just the whole psychological operation is a good example of this.
Sometimes I'm in a hurry and in a hurry between engagements, lunch, or dinner, and dinner won't be ready for a while, so I just want to eat something delicious that's quick and easy. And that is when I say, thank God for Paleo Valley. Paleo Valley has extremely high standards and only uses the highest quality, cleanest sources for their animal and plant food products, and they have excellent jerky meats neatly packaged so you can take them anywhere and never be stuck without something great to feed your beautiful body and stabilize your mind. I love their pasture-raised turkey sticks in the original and cranberry orange flavor. Angie, Penny, and the kids absolutely love their grass-fed beef sticks, which come in jalapeno summer sausage, garlic summer sausage, teriyaki, and original flavors. I can assure you Paleo Valley's meat sticks are so good you could literally make a meal of them or have them as snacks and you'd feel satisfied and satiated and know you've fed your body top-quality nutrition that will make your cells dance for joy. Yoo-hoo! Paleo Valley has lots of other great additions to meet your food and nutrition needs, and their website is loaded with great articles, podcasts, recipes, and more. Go to www.paleovalley.com to get your 15% Living 4D discount. Use the code CHECK15, all small case, CHEK 15 on checkout. The whole family will be satiated, nourished, and glad you did.
Yeah, I think, Ken Wilber's research shows that about 70% of the world population is at the traditional stage of development, which is the magic and mythical. And then we talked about the magic. The mythical, of course, relates to stories that are intended to give meaning in life and help us understand the life process. But when we're trapped in that level of perception, and 70% of the population is at that level, those are really still in the structural levels of the child's mental development, where one needs a parent figure to guide them. And so this is, Ken Wilber says this is exactly who the greatest percentage of voters were for Donald Trump. And this is why politicians commandeer religions, because they're looking for powerful leader figures that create a sense of safety and somehow portray the concept that they'll have to do less to get more.
Yeah. Wow, this is so resonant. In fact, my wife, Kelly Brogan, of course, she's been focusing so much work on understanding that psychology of parentification and why we, have grafted ourselves onto this highly abusive, immoral, world-destroying system, right? That we believe we can vote and actually have an impact when it's, basically two sides of the same coin. I mean, I just feel like you're hitting onto some really important stuff here.
Well, if you look at the science of brainwashing and you look into the history of marketing and the people that developed the science and concepts of marketing, one of and another factor I tell people that they are often unaware of is they outlawed subliminal marketing and messaging in movies and television quite a long time ago. But what people don't realize is that now they're, instead of doing it through hidden messages, images that you can't see, they're doing it through light itself, because light has an almost infinite capacity to carry information, so they can embed messages into light. They're at frequencies your eyes won't pick up, but your nervous system and your perceptual systems can and do pick up. And so I warn people, remember that more people watch television than any other medium of communication. And now, of course, a phone falls into the category of a television, a computer, anything with a screen on it. So I warn them, you need to look carefully at what the word television really means. It means tell a vision.
Yeah.
So if you don't have your own sense of values to guide your choices and a dream for your own life and your dream for your relationships and how you'd like to see the world be, then you're susceptible to somebody else's vision and you're very, very potentially gullible.
No, that's a very powerful point. And I think that it's no longer the realm of conspiracy theory, which anyone who looks at where that term came from knows it was itself a CIA psyop to introduce the concept that people who question the establishment and these collusive ties are just conspiracy theorists, right? But that this is happening, and that it's not just the violence on television, but the violence of the medium itself that has been weaponized. I mean, we saw this even in the relatively mainstream documentary, The Great Hack, the weaponization, the weapons grade use of social media against the public. I've had to focus on this, at least I feel like I have, since they tried to deplatform GreenMedInfo starting in May of 2019. And then I stumbled up, meaning Google just took all of our results off, along with all these other natural health sites, as well as banning us from Pinterest and MailChimp, is that they basically have been determining through the search engine manipulation effect, Dr. Epstein identified, 25% of the world's elections were likely determined simply by Google's auto-complete suggestions, which are psychologically manipulated. So human behavior has never been so vulnerable to the manipulation of the technology itself, blue light, and all the things you're saying, which are very profound, as well as obviously the content they're presenting to us as if somehow objective or generated by AI, which it's really not. It's very human biased and political.
Yes. Well, if you could just define the mission, vision, and values for GreenMedInfo, how could you encapsulate that so that we listeners can understand that what inspires you and Kelly to devote your life to basically to, sharing what you do and the upkeep and maintenance of a platform? Because I own a number of such platforms. I know that that's a full-time job and it's a lot of commitment. So, I'm curious, and I'd love the listeners to know, what is the mission, vision, and values that inspire you to express yourself in that way and share that with the world?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, so the mission has been to disseminate as widely as possible the open access data on natural medicines being validated by science, as well as the unintended adverse effects of interventions that are commonly used and misrepresented as safe and effective by the conventional system. So that could be the CDC's vaccine schedule, which has never once had a trial in it proving with a saline, placebo that it is safe and effective. Like that's something when people find out, they just can't believe, but it's true. Like that's the research itself saying that. Like Cochrane collaboration on influenza vaccine shows that of the tens of thousands of studies performed, there's no unequivocal proof of safety and efficacy for children under 2, adults, elderly, those who work with the elderly, despite the fact that it's practically mandated at this point. So that's the kind of thing that when I ran into, the vision was, let's get this information as widely as possible. Obviously, since pharma is the primary funder of mainstream media outside election cycles, it's not going to be found there. And then, of course, with deplatforming happening, you can barely find this stuff even on YouTube or any of these social media platforms. So we're totally independent. We're user supported. I have no advertising, although it would generate the kind of revenue we need to stay solvent. I've, because of conflict of interest, removed ads. And so a lot of it is just promotion of free events. And so what we're doing is just giving people access through our free newsletter and the database to all this research that already exists. Taxpayers funded it. Many of them don't know it exists. And that's our way of basically ensuring democracy, which requires the free flow of information, as well as informed consent, which is no small matter, given that we only really came up with the medical ethical principles that should be operative today because of the Nuremberg trials and literally Nazi experimentation on Jews. This was why these principles came to be globally sort of validated, and they're not being followed today. So that's one reason why we exist.
Yeah. What's your vision for GreenMedInfo? I mean, if GreenMedInfo does what you intended to do in the world, what does that look like?
So it's always been my goal to get the information as widely as possible. And so really it's just a matter of accurate reporting on these peer-reviewed studies that prove the point that pretty much anyone with a background in natural healing or has had an experience of, say, taking echinacea, knowing it helped them with a cold, they shouldn't have to have this kind of science. But the reality is that there's an inquisition going on, and medical monotheism, implies that they will literally come after. Well, first they define you as heretical, and then they come after you. And at some point they may prosecute you and put you in jail. Like in Florida, for example, it's a Class D felony to recommend cherry juice for inflammation, someone walks into a health food store, and yet, the University of Michigan, other great clinical trials show that, in fact, it is safe and effective for that, but it violates FTC, FDA guidelines on structure function claims. And that's absolutely absurd. That's unconstitutional. And it's just
well, basically anything that helps people but doesn't put money in their pockets is illegal.
Exactly. So the FDA is a captured agency like almost all the others when it comes to pharma's influence. And so we're at the point now where the best way to get around that is to just take full control of your own health, govern thyself, basically, know thyself, govern thyself, medicate thyself. That's really where I'm moving in my own advocacy, is just keep giving people the tools, the information. And I think it's working because, like I said, I think back in 2012, UNICEF published this article called Anti-Vaccine Sentiment in Eastern Europe. And at the time, I was like, really? They're naming GreenMedInfo as like a target of misinformation when I'm just a blogger here. At the time I was still working at a health food store, just trying to get the information out. They found it that threatening that they've now spent almost 10 years to orchestrate a global attempt now to intermediate, social media platforms. And, what happened, by the way, in March of last year, May, was MailChimp kicked us off the platform. And it turns out that they're a CDC funding partner, along with almost every corporation you could think of. So they've already infiltrated so much of what appears to be a neutral platform. It could be Twitter, it could be Facebook. It's all infiltrated at this point. And so the one thing we have right now is our own website and newsletter. So no matter how they try to deplatform us, we can still keep that information preserved, and it's accumulating. So we keep adding studies, and we encourage people to get our free newsletter. And if they want to be a member, great. That's how we keep it running.
One of the things that concerns me is that we know from studies of nature that diversity is essential to survival and sustainability in nature. And we know that monocropping has very destructive effects on the population of the soil microbiome and the soil microorganisms and all the things that are related to diversity, such as nutrients and the interfacing of insects, plants, and animals, etc. But with all this editing and screening and deleting and getting rid of people and all that, they don't realize that we're allowing a loss of freedom of speech, which kills the very diversity that is necessary for creativity to emerge. And as Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. So what they're doing is they're trying to linearize human thought for their own profitability, but it leads us straight into the shadow of, because any idea or concept always has an unconscious underbelly, or the parts that you're unaware of. And so when we keep going in the same direction and we're not looking, for example, at the impact of fossil fuels on the environment or the impact of medical drugs on the humanity, which then affects the environment, we're not looking at the rates of addiction on legal drugs like white sugar, alcohol, etc., that we're buying into an illusion that to the degree you buy into the illusion, you're caught in a belief system. And by definition, all belief systems are exclusional, or you couldn't have a system. For example, if the cooling system in your car was open-minded, well, there'd be water leaking out of it and your engine would fry. So belief systems are self-protective and self-defensive.
Yes.
And use basically negative memes. If you don't follow the good book, you'll burn in hell. That's a defense meme in order to protect themselves, but they're closed and they're blind to a holistic viewpoint of what one must be aware of. In other words, a good example is I had a patient a couple of years ago that had cancer of the throat, and he had been to several medical doctors and things were just making him worse. But he came to me with this extreme hate of Western medicine. Mm-hmm. But I said to him, look, you have a very advanced stage of throat cancer, which is a high kill rate. And though you've come to me for holistic healing and holistic guidance, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because if I give you good advice, but for some reason it's not working to stop the cancer, and you avoid going to get the tests that you can get to let you and me and all of the people trying to help you know whether we're winning or losing the battle, we won't know when to change strategies, and we'll be flying overly blind, which in my opinion is not holistic. Now you're stuck in another ism or belief system. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I gave him addresses for 3 treatment centers in the region that he lived in Stockholm, but he left me and did not listen to me. And then all of a sudden, one day I had a real strong intuition, like my soul was saying, you better follow up with Danny. And I got a hold of him and said, did you go to one of those treatment centers and get checked? And are you getting yourself monitored so we know how you're doing? And he said, no, I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I said, look, if you want me to coach you, I want you to frickin' get off the phone right now and go get checked. Well, his cancer had progressed, and ultimately he died because he went so far down the rabbit hole that the only treatments they could give him to bring him back was a lot of surgery and radiation therapy, and he refused to do it. So he died. So what am I saying? I'm saying as much as I don't like the general theme of allopathic medicine and traditional concepts, I think, as Ken Wilber says, there's a little bit of truth in everything. In order for us to truly be holistic and live holistically, I think we need to use our intelligence and our advanced technologies to analyze both sides of the argument and look at the data on both sides of the fence, look at the pros and the cons of vaccinations or any other thing. But you can't do that if you keep editing everything that's out there to the point that nobody can actually look on the other side of the fence.
I really love Bioptimizer's excellent product line, and I can honestly say that I use them to enhance digestion, energy, and recovery from exercise pretty much every day. This is not biohacking, but bioharmonizing, and you'll notice a difference right away. Bioptimizer's products are at the cutting edge of health science and ideal for supporting your digestion, metabolism, assimilation, and elimination. That means you get more from your food, your supplements, you heal faster, and perform better. Their excellent Capex enzymes not only enhance fat and protein digestion, they stimulate your metabolism naturally, and I love them. Living 4D with Paul Chek listeners save 10% on any order using the code PAUL10. That's capital PAUL10 on checkout. Go to BIOPTIMIZERS.com and check out their amazing product line. If you listen to my podcast number 55, you can meet Bioptimizer's co-founder, Wade Lightheart. He's an amazing, wise man, and I think you'll love what you learn and see why our values are so aligned.
Now, Sayer, you've obviously got a hell of a lot of knowledge on the COVID-19 pandemic. You have definitely got one of the best collections of expert testimonials from highly qualified people that I've seen out there, which I believe is really in line with the whole concept of the plandemic and that documentary that's coming out. I'd love it if you could share an overview of what you've learned from all your investigations and what your viewpoint on the whole issue is, along with what you feel we need to do to get a democracy back, get freedom of speech back, and avoid challenges like this in the future.
Sure. There's been so much controversy around this topic that I think what at least I can contribute to the discussion is looking at the evidence. And when I say evidence, I mean, let's say, if we're looking at case fatality rates, which are a really important determining factor as to how, we decide if we're going to lock down the world, basically, which is what happened. The original estimates of case fatality rates for COVID were orders of magnitude higher than what actually came to pass. And so what I mean by that is, like, let's say if original estimates the WHO was giving out were something like 4 or 6% of those who would become infected would end up dying. What actually happened was it was more around 0.1 to 0.2%. And this is actually so fascinating. But Dr. Fauci, who's the head of the coronavirus task force for the White House, he himself published last month in the New England Journal of Medicine an editorial which stated that the case fatality rates were probably 0.1%, which he said was about what you would find for the seasonal flu. So now that we have the numbers, we know that when, for example, Trump shut down the United States on March, it was the 15th, he was operating under the assumption that what the WHO was saying and this guy Ferguson out of Imperial College was saying was going to come to pass, and that didn't happen. So just looking at it from that perspective, there's no conspiracy theory here. It's all the numbers coming from those most trusted global and national authorities saying that actually, no, I'm sorry, this was not justified because 2 million Americans didn't die, as they said. The second point is that both the World Health Organization and the U.S. Vital Health Statistics Agency basically started to tell their coroners and medical staff and officials that they should label as COVID deaths those deaths that weren't even tested with a virus test. And all they needed was suspicion of infection. Now, if that individual had a comorbidity like heart disease or cancer, maybe they suffered for 10, 20, 30 years with respiratory issues and obesity, and they were chain smokers, that didn't matter. They would still label any death in those individuals as COVID. So even at the worst case scenario of, let's say, 0.2% case fatality rate, at least half of those were completely misattributed. So in light of that, it starts to make sense why people are calling this a pandemic, because we were basically completely lied to about the threat represented by this vector, if you'll call it that. And that is why, in many ways, this is an opportunity for us to reclaim our sovereign rights and be aware that, at least in the United States, we do have this piece of paper called the Constitution, and that it's only as real as we vivify it with our actions. And like we said earlier, the prana of belief, when we believe it to be true and we make it true in our lives. Let's say you and I go out to the park today. That's a radical act of disobedience. So let's say we hug somebody in public. That's a radical act of disobedience now. It's the most human of all things to do. It's the most healthiest thing you could possibly do. Like going to the beach right now in Miami, you'll get arrested if you walk onto the beach. That's what's happened, is we're being forced to be sort of revolutionaries in doing the most simple things like walking, breathing, hugging. And that's the beauty of what's happening, is that you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist or someone who spends years like I did, like behind the scenes trying to understand what these agendas were all about and when they would be implemented. Now anybody, everyday people, are being threatened with mandatory vaccination. Like when COVID comes out, that could really happen, at least for employment, etc. It used to just be the near Holocaust of children that have suffered death or disability, which we know is true because the Supreme Court ruled that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe, and the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act of 1986 has paid out over $4 billion to families of children that have been killed or damaged, and that's probably only 1% of what's been picked up and compensated for. So now it's in everyone's face, and so we can all together take this as an opportunity, given what I think so many people are seeing this for what it is now.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of the video testimonials I watched, and I'm not sure if it came through your site or not, was a German epidemiologist and virologist who's in charge of tracking viruses for the entire country of Germany for the German government. Are you familiar with that video?
I think that might be Dr. Wodark.
Yeah, it possibly. It was in German and subtitled so you could understand it in English, but he beautifully showed right on his own computer system that he uses as in his work for Germany, the tracking of all the different viruses and how they map all this stuff. And he was showing that this COVID-19 is no more of a threat than the common flu. But what he said was profound and not surprising to me at all. He said that you got to understand, when a bunch of scientists get a chance to take advantage of a situation like this, where they can inflate something, get some prestige and some exposure in the media, it increases their likelihood of getting funding. And there's so many people competing for resources that this is a great opportunity for them to create the illusion necessary to get the funding they want to continue to do their research.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I can't remember who said it, but I was listening to an interview with an expert on science, and they said, unfortunately, scientists are now the modern prostitutes, because they'll say anything, do anything, and create statistics to validate anything for money. Mm-hmm. And it seems like we really have lost, we've lost a lot of the authenticity and reliability of science due to these negative influences. And now science is being used as a political weapon, but because so few people, A, have the willingness to do research to find out if something's true, and B, hardly anybody out there understands scientific study design. So they don't know a good scientific study from a bad one. Right. So they just read an abstract and believe it as the gospel.
Well, to confirm what you're saying, this is faith-based more than anything. Okay, so epidemiology is a good example. To propose that one can isolate, for example, a singular vector or a factor of morbidity like a virus as causing, a number of people to get sick without identifying the infinite variables that humans live within that are not being accounted for or measured. The whole quote science is absolutely garbage, like garbage, So the same thing applies to vaccination, where you're basically proposing that, an intervention in a healthy individual, you can prove that it causes a non-event. So if it's an MMR vaccine that you're giving a healthy child and that individual doesn't receive measles like in their life, then you're claiming that an intervention is creating a non-event. It's just, there's no logic here. So let's just say that ultimately, when people start to understand what quote science is, it's like excreta of the industry, right? Pharma specifically. It's not what people think. Null and negative findings, they don't have a legal obligation to publish them. So they could do 100 studies like Merck or whatever corporation, and the one study that shows a little relative risk reduction on a highly toxic chemical, they can spin it and actually talk about it as if it's absolute risk reduction, semantic sleight of hand, and then sell it for billions of dollars, even though it's causing 75 adverse health effects, including deadly ones. This is just the nature of that kind of sorcery. So we're at a place now where more people are realizing that science is not objective, highly biased, and it's being used, as you said, as a geopolitical weapon. So I want people to understand that germ theory has been weaponized. So instead of focusing on gain of function research, which absolutely has been done, they cannot weaponize coronavirus. They can't do it in the way people believe, because ultimately this is a viral false flag, as all viral false flags are, meaning it's meant to distract from the damage that cells undergo on a moment-to-moment basis due to radioisotopes, hundreds and thousands of novel, new petrochemically derived toxicants, every imaginable non-native EMF exposure or waveform. All of those conditions of toxicity and cellular harm are overlooked in favor of this concept that, a novel new virus is causing the harm. And that's why in Italy, for example, 99% of those who were recorded dead by their equivalent of the CDC were already sick. Half of them had 3 chronic diseases that are considered lethal. And the average age of death, as I recall, was 76 years of age. So it's absurd to say that someone who lived their entire life and died close to the natural age of death, it was because of an invisible particle that has no intrinsic power. Like viruses don't have ATP. They don't move themselves from body to body. And then even if they do, they're aerosolized in some kind of, droplet. That doesn't mean that they can penetrate through the cell. As you know, take a Shaolin monk and press a blade up to his neck. I mean, there's resistance the cell can put off that is just I'm just trying to recontextualize this.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that come to my mind. I recently interviewed Ervin Laszlo. Are you familiar with Ervin Laszlo?
No.
No?
No.
No. Well, check him out. Ervin Laszlo is about 87 or 88 years old now. He's written probably 25 absolutely excellent books, all right up your alley, by the way. This guy's a genius, bar none.
Cool.
He's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize twice. He's edited and published over, I think, 200 papers and books with other authors. And he's a world famous scientist and systems theorist. And very deeply spiritual and highly connected man. And so I brought up this issue of, I said to him, I'm worried that we're losing validity in science and that science is becoming hijacked and that corporations are using scientists to produce the results they want. And if they don't get the results they want, they lose their funding or their jobs. And I said, I'm curious, how do we get morality back into science? And he gave an answer that I thought was quite profound, and I really want to share it with you and the audience if you haven't listened to that podcast. He said, Paul, well, I understand, but I don't agree. He said, what you're referring to as scientists behaving that way are not actually scientists because no real scientist functions that way. He said, what's happened is technicians are now presenting themselves as scientists, and the technicians that work for the large corporations are producing what looks like science, but is actually not science. It's a bunch of technicians telling you what they want you to hear to get you to buy their products. So he made a key distinction, which is that between the scientist and the technician, which I thought was really quite potentially true and worth paying attention to.
Yeah, no, I love that. I feel like, exactly. Science has become, in a way, the marketing arm of chemical industries. When I say chemical industry, basically you look at pharma, it's sort of a subdivision. They take bulk chemicals and they create novel synthetic analogs of what are ultimately usually natural compounds or modeled after interacting with natural forms within the human body. And they get their market exclusivity and patented. And then before it kills too many people, they take it off the market, usually halfway through the patent life, right? So it's just a massive scam as far as people have really drank the Kool-Aid, unfortunately, that these highly poisonous chemicals are not only, again, therapeutic, right, but that are necessary to be alive and healthy. That's why people still take aspirin. It's really quite alarming, although at least now the weight of evidence shows that it's no longer recommended for primary or secondary prevention of cardiovascular events.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that I tell my students that I'd like to share, because I think it's appropriate here, the gold standard for scientific research in medicine is a double-blind study. And I say to my students, how would you feel if I offered you a double-blind seeing eye dog? Would you follow it? And the point that I make in context to this is that the human body is a cybernetic system, which by definition is a system of interconnected systems that are constantly talking to and influencing each other. And science, modern medical science, does not even come close to having the technology to monitor the influences of each system in the body on each other. And example is, you can check someone's 24-hour cortisol rhythm, and they may have very high cortisol or very depressed cortisol levels. And you could say, okay, they're in phase 1, 2, or 3 adrenal exhaustion. But none of that tells you a damn thing about how they got that way.
Yeah.
So if you just start throwing hormones at them and you don't look at what's going on in their life, from environmental toxicity to heavy metal toxicity to a recent divorce to moving houses to job loss or death in the family,
yes,
you're really flying very, very blind, and you're using a very allopathic model, which is, this for that. And so
yes,
from narrowing something down to isolate it, yes, the concept of the double-blind study is helpful because you're removing other influences so you can get a cleaner result. But when you're interpreting that as how the human body actually works and what you need to do with regard to drugs, to surgery, and therapeutic interventions, that's about as dangerous as you can possibly get.
Absolutely. And I love what you did with that metaphor, because the gold standard, of course, too, is those who own the gold make the standard. So that's also the subtext behind why any of this is being done.
A lot of people don't really understand or realize that science is really the religious arm of scientific materialism. And it's no different than religion. And to prove that to my students, because I get students that are so science, they won't listen to anything I say that doesn't fit their paradigm. And I say, look, I've been in this business for 36 years, and I can show you studies from 20 years ago that were absolutely objective confirmations of hormone pathways or what causes this disease or that disease. And 10 years later, a new study shows that it was completely, absolutely wrong. Right. And this goes on over and over and over again. And it wasn't long ago we thought the world was flat, and we believed we couldn't fly, and we believed no human being could run faster than 4 minutes in the mile, and a long, long laundry list of other such things. Yeah. So when people actually fall into the trap of believing science as objective and therefore the truth, right, they forget that science is forever changing, and it's no different than religion in that regard.
Well, yeah, in fact, I like to say that science today, right, or scientism is the religion that would devour all others. And there's some very interesting examples of this, like the Dalai Lama, who is held up as being some kind of supreme reincarnation of the Buddha among some belief systems. You know, when you look at his CIA background, it becomes very interesting in his pro-polio eradication behavior with promoting vaccination agendas. But regardless, basically, he himself said, oh, okay, well, science doesn't validate Buddhist teachings, well, we're going to go with science. So it's such a great example. It is such a powerful, hypnotic thing that people still default. You go to talk to the most spiritual people on the planet, right? The ones that are most sovereign, and they'll be like, well, don't I need to take an antibiotic when I have an infection? Or they still have a carve-outs because they haven't done the work to understand what is actually an embedded spirituality or anti-spirituality in allopathy. So like the concept that we are first and foremost bodies, and that you can somehow, like you had said, isolate the hormone profile of someone and not look at the temporality and the context and the functional medical process that led to that dysfunction, how to correct it through working on emotions or the spiritual core of the human body self, you know? So like that's why narrative medicine is so powerful. You can have arthritis, you can eat nightshades, that can aggravate it, but maybe from a past life experience you haven't yet resolved. That's why you ended up attracting those behaviors and dietary, comorbidities into your life. So, we're complex. One thing I would also say is that we're fractals. And so that means we need to eat fractals or use them as medicine to work with our bodies. So when we're taking monochemicals and calling them medicines, and taking those, assuming they're somehow going to do anything but suppress symptoms and cause new ones, it's not understanding the infinite complexity of food as well as our own bodies. And that's kind of why I think the new biology, the new biophysics is confirming natural medicine has always been infinitely more intelligent and targeted and effective than this Rockefeller chemical gunk-based medicine.
Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to share one of my favorite Symbiotica products called the Omega. This is an amazing product. When I tried it the first time and every time, I found it very calming and very centering. And the immediate thought I had is that this product is great for people that are under a lot of stress and have busy minds. So I asked Shervine to come tell us what's unique about this amazing product, the Omega.
Well, the fish oil industry is running havoc across the world, destroying our Mother Nature and providing oxidized omega-3 oils to so many people that just don't know. So
a lot of the fish is toxic too.
Super toxic. I mean, you're getting homeopathic doses of mercury, heavy metals, pesticides, plastics. I can go on and on if you understand homeopathy, which you do. And so we wanted to circumvent that. And guess what? Fish don't make DHA and EPA. They don't synthesize it. They're eating little sea creatures that are feeding on microalgae.
Right.
So what did we do? We went to the cleanest place on earth, Nova Scotia, to extract a wild heirloom strain of algae with warm water, so it's still intact, it's still alive. And from there, we took other microalgae, including one called astaxanthin, which we now know is the strongest antioxidant on earth. You know, it's that pigment that makes flamingos pink,
yes,
or makes salmon red.
Yeah.
So we get that directly sourced from Iceland. You can see it in all my videos, me going through the whole grow facility. It's incredible stuff. I didn't stop there. We added organic lemon terpenes. We added phosphatidylcholine. We used organic sea buckthorn oil, which is omega-3, 6, 7, and 9. This is one powerhouse omega product, never been done before. This is a flagship to Symbiotica, and it's an honor to be able to provide this product to so many mothers and children and everyone across the board.
Yes, in fact, you know, my son's a high-energy kid that doesn't like to sleep at night, so one of the first things that come out of the refrigerator is the omega to calm my mana down, and mana means life force. So, hey, you guys, this is really top-notch stuff. I love it. I feel fantastic when I use it. So get on over to cymbiotика.com, and on checkout, use your code, capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 15. That's check 15 to get your discount. And while you're there, check out all the other absolutely amazing products. And as always, love to hear your feedback. Sayer, I love your book, Regenerate, Unlocking Your Body's Radical Resilience Through the New Biology. And I absolutely appreciate and love the work in your new book. There are a number of questions and dialogue points I'd like to explore in regard to what's in the book. The first one is energy availability. The statistics that you share on how much energy the mitochondria generate within our body is really incredible. And quantum biology is giving us a very different picture of how life in the universe emerges and powers itself. I'd like to start by asking you where you feel we are at, human beings, with regard to getting zero-point energies harnessed so we can get past fossil fuel and atomic sources of energy. And what do you think the impact of the planet will be once we accomplish using zero-point energy?
Well, I love this question because in the writing of my book, I in no way intended to get into the topic of free energy. You know, that was something, obviously, some people consider that term absurd. But when I was going deep into the literature on cellular bioenergetics, you know, first of all, I stumbled upon a very compelling set of studies proving basically that we do harness energy through the mediating factor of chlorophyll, melanin, and water itself, thanks to Jerry Pollack's work on the fourth phase of water, is, you know, basically driving the energy requirements or providing them for the body in a way that the conventional view, you know, that ATP is the primary locus of energy production, it doesn't account for. So I was blown away to find examples within certain creatures like the mantis shrimp and the pistol shrimp that are able to induce water cavitation events with the strike of their claws. And those events produce temperatures that approximate what you find on the surface of the sun. So out hidden in broad daylight were these examples of biological systems that are clearly accessing what is known as zero-point energy. So the quantum vacuum has what is, if it could be transduced entirely, a practically infinite amount of energy available at any point in space-time. And so these creatures are somehow harnessing them. So when I started looking deeper into the Casimir effect and looking at the way atoms work, as well as basic molecules holding together in the body, supramolecular configurations, it became clear that basically we're harnessing this zero-point energy. And so that got me really excited because when you start looking at mitochondria, which of course are considered to be the powerhouses of the cell, I mean, they have what is equivalent in terms of the magnetic field strength of, you know, the inner mitochondrial membrane of 30 million volts per meter, which is, once again, about as much energy as you find discharged by a lightning bolt. And so if there's one lightning bolt worth of potential energy within a single mitochondrion, and you have 5,000 perhaps in a heart muscle cell or neuron, and literally trillions of them throughout our body, that seems to indicate that there's a near infinite amount of energy available to us that isn't coming from our food, so to speak, right? That it's actually being extracted from the quantum vacuum.
That's very interesting, and it's going to lead right into my next point, because if we have that kind of energetic potential, and if you look at what a lot of scientists and even metaphysically oriented scientists like William A. Tiller are telling us, that everything in the created universe can be boiled down to energy and information. The point I'm getting at here is that if we have that kind of energy potential, but we're suffering all sorts of health problems, and our lifespans aren't what they could be or have been reported to be possible by various different groups of people, be they religious people like Buddhists and other people like that, and historical record, it sort of lends itself to the fact that our mind is what's the chief regulator of how we're using our innate energy potentials. Just curious what your thoughts are there.
Wow, that's really deep. I mean, from what I understand, they're starting to look at consciousness within the nanotubules, right, within the cell.
Yes.
So there's something going, right? Yeah, there's amazing work being done there.
Stuart Hammerhoff and Roger Penrose are doing. I've studied a lot of that research.
Yeah, so it's fascinating. You know, what I've always assumed is that what we've considered most real here in the West, which is the integument of the onion, if you will, the outermost shell, the lowest vibration part of us, the flesh of our body, is actually itself a manifestation of a subtler realm, which you could call it energetic, astral, etheric. Yeah. In fact, ether is a synonym for the quantum vacuum, really.
Yes.
But so therefore, right, like so in Vedic ontology, that's really the truth, is that we are fundamentally at the core, the spirit, right? And then we obviously the vibration lowers every layer out you go, and then you have, again, what is reified in the West is most real, the flesh. So therefore, what you're saying, the mind, quote, body connection, or the primordiality, prioritization of, the belief. In many ways, I believe we are souls, right? Obviously having an embodied experience. And I do believe that that's how incarnation works, So it's a very interesting topic. We can go all over the place with it.
Yeah, well, as I read sections of your book about the amount of energy we have within our bodies and the new science of how we harness energy, I was having flashbacks to my studies of Pueblo Indian man and sun dancer Joseph Rael's teachings, which he's written several books, and there's a incredible DVD series that I've got on his teachings and his explanations of what his father, who was a shaman, taught him and even demonstrated. For example, he describes that when he was when he was a boy and he was with his family and his father was teaching them things, they were doing a spiritual practice, and he said he literally watched his father told him, this is what I'm going to do. Now pay attention. And his father basically walked right through the wall of their hut. Their, you know how the Pueblo huts are made of like clay and stuff like that. And he came back from another dimension and brought a flower back and handed the flower to Joseph Rael and was demonstrating to him basically that the reality that your senses are showing you is really very limited, and there's a lot more going on.
Yes.
And do you know much about the sun dancers?
I do, and that's fascinating. I mean, it really, that level of commitment, right, to transcending, the flesh I would imagine would open up that sort of city, as they might call, or power that emerges, that defies natural explanation.
Yes, I mean, to do the sun dance, you dance for 4 days, day and night, nonstop, without food or water. Now, that right there is
Yes.
It's natural to say that's impossible, but clearly it's been going on for hundreds of years. And Joseph Rael did the sun dance, I think, 16 times in his life. And he said in his discussions that the sun dancers reach the point where they can sustain themselves effectively on breath and cosmic energy alone. In fact, I think he said they don't even need water. he said he chose
Yes.
he said he chose to eat because he enjoys the social act of eating and being with people that way, but he does not need to eat. So when we have, and having spent a lot of time watching documentaries or his education, studying his books, I don't find an ounce of a guy who's trying to lie and manipulate to people. I mean, there's no way you can do the sun dance and be that kind of a person. So I'm wondering, what do you feel our potential in this regard is? And do you know of any practices that are being effectively used to achieve these abilities?
Well, first of all, that was one of the beautiful things about writing this book for me. I didn't intend to go down this rabbit hole. And in chapter 3 of my book, The New Biophysics of Energy Synthesis, I inevitably ended up with the conclusion that what you're describing is absolutely a possible experience that the human body is constructed to make possible. And so what I mean by that is, if you look at just the very basic phenomenon of water cavitation, mechanical systems like propellers produce these water bubbles, which are basically exotic steam bubbles, and they implode upon themselves. That's what cavitation is, creating heat that approximates what you find on the surface of the sun when measured. But the implication is that within the center of the cavitation bubble, you may find millions of degrees as well, like in the center of the sun. And this is actually something you can induce through sound. It's called sonoluminescence. You can do it through a laser, an acoustical wave. In fact, what I found is that microsonation events happen within cell membranes, and they are activated through ultrasound. That's why ultrasound is so dangerous for doing these fetal scans. So when you whisper, you can produce ultrasound. So theoretically, we can self-administer cavitation within the cells, and may do it all the time. Now, why is that important? Why is that amazing? Well, because the research of Mark Leclerc, who I've written about in my book, he has a company called Nanospire. He worked with Lockheed Martin and AstraZeneca. He has all these patents. He's an amazing technologist, but he discovered that when he induced this cavitation event in his laboratory, he basically saw a micro black hole formation and then a microstellar synthesis event, which generated the entire periodic chart, including diamonds. And this event apparently is happening all the time. In fact, the work of Nassim Haramein, others have shown that the sun is literally a white hole around a black hole. So you look at sunspots, those are literally like little vortices going in to the center of this phenomenon. And it's a somnoluminescent based phenomenon, not unlike when you induce a star in a jar, where there's documentaries on this, again, through acoustical wave or through other technology. You can induce this cavitation event. So it looks like you have a little star inside of the water. So I mean, when you start getting into this stuff and you start realizing that our biology is constructed in such a way that we apparently may be taking advantage of these sorts of phenomena. The one that I find most fascinating in chapter 3 of my book is that in 1978, this Army scientist, Solomon Goldfein, he performed a series of experiments with mitochondria to evaluate Louise Kevron's claims, right? He was the advocate that biological systems through low energy nuclear transmutation are able to take elements like, for example, like sodium and turn it into, potassium or magnesium. And this violates conventional views that you need really high pressures, temperatures to induce these changes, like a cataclysmic explosive event. But what he found were that the magnesium ion-bound ATP or MG-ATP within the mitochondria, their helical structure enables the acceleration of hydrogen ions to relativistic speeds sufficient to transform target atoms into other elements. So basically, they obey the same criteria as cyclotron particle accelerators on a molecular scale. So our mitochondria perform a number of functions. In fact, some argue that the ATP itself is used really more for biomass formation. It's like an epiphenomena, or it's like if you have a windmill and you burn the windmill for energy. That's kind of how we're looking at ATP, but it's literally helping to, like Tesla said, basically harness this free energy through, the wheel work, of the body's miraculous structure. So anyway, it's exciting stuff because the implication, and Jack Kruse is the only one out there that I've seen reference this, is that our mitochondria can take light and turn it into programmable matter. Our mitochondria are also over unity. So what Goldfein found was that more energy was produced than you would expect through conventional thermodynamics, right? So we are a free energy device. We do transform light into matter, and we access the quantum vacuum. So we are very similar to what you might call ET technology. This was something Mark Leclerc found in his discovery of this new form of water, as well as people like Greer, who talk about ET craft as alternative propulsion and energy production systems that literally pop into the 3 dimensions, right? They violate all the conventional laws of physics because they're not operating in the classical Cartesian Newtonian space-time. They're in a quantum field. They're waveforms, and that is why, we know now technology like this was harnessed by ancient civilizations, which left this legacy post-cataclysmically of the megaliths, like that no one can explain how these, 2,000-ton perfectly mitered blocks of stone were produced, right, with technology we have today even. Well, water cavitation was one example of how they may have been doing that.
Yeah, a couple of things come to my mind. I suspect you're familiar with Rudolf Steiner and his teachings?
Yes.
Steiner, I have quite a comprehensive collection. I've got about 185 books by Rudolf Steiner and his initiates, and I've studied them for about 25 years. But in one of the books of Steiner's teachings, he's talking about the sun, and he says the sun is not a body of mass or a ball of gas like people think it is. He said, if you were to go to the sun and be inside of it, you would think you were inside of a giant circular mirror.
Wow. Yes.
And,
yes.
And I could go off on all sorts of interesting discussions because I do a lot of astral travel work. I'm a remote viewer, and I do also work with plant medicines. And so I explore these things, and I take a concept like that, and I'll say, okay, let me go to the sun and have a look. So I've actually spent a lot of time looking into a lot of these things, and I don't want to sidetrack the interview, but these are very interesting things. I mean, when you get someone, like a lot of people would say, oh, that's a bunch of BS, but I say, well, wait a minute. Do you understand who Rudolf Steiner was? What do you do with a guy that invented biodynamic farming through spiritual awareness, founded the Waldorf school system, created a legitimate cure for cancer that's being used today, created anthroposophic medicine, created the Waldorf school system, created eurythmy, a form of movement therapy that helps heal all sorts of pathologies, and the list is very, very long. How do you take someone like that and say, well, he's just a nutcase? That would be like saying Joseph Rael's a nutcase and he's a sun dancer, So
yes. No, I mean, you're helping me right now because I was unaware that Steiner referenced this, and yet I believe that if we were to take an honest, sober look at what we think we know about the most basic of all things, we would have to come to accept that the mystical language, metaphoric symbolism is the best way to articulate the things of the world, because especially natural phenomena, because they're absolutely infinitely complex, and we should humble ourselves before them and not assume that we can reduce them to number or simple, rhetorical language.
Yeah, a couple points. I'll just share briefly. When I did my own investigations on the sun and asked my soul to guide me into the sun and explain it to me, my soul told me something very profound. My son said, stars are points, vector points of high energy that are so intense, they literally burn a hole in space-time, and it is through that metaphorical hole in space-time that the 0 point energy pours into the creative matrix of nature.
I love it. It's beautiful. Wow, that's really good.
You know, Steiner...
That makes sense.
Yeah, Steiner also said, and now this, I'm quoting Steiner here because of what you said about, and I read this in your book, so I am with you on it, that the structure of the inside of the mitochondria and the spiral structure is essentially reproducing the atom collider structure. And Steiner said, man will continue to create technologies outside of himself until he realizes they're all copies of technology that exist within him, or he destroys the world. The question is, which will come first?
You know, that is very profound. I would like to take these quotes after this and repurpose them, because I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
This is really, it's very confirmatory.
Another person who's very, very profound on concepts like this is Walter Russell. Are you familiar with Walter Russell?
Yes. I mean, it's been years since I've been in his books, but yes, I have a colleague right now diving deep into his work for reasons that will become apparent soon.
Yeah, well, I think it was in 1927, he wrote a very comprehensive document to the U.S. government warning them what would happen if they started playing with nuclear power. And Walter Russell only had a 4th grade education. He did all this through spiritual development, and he had a 49-day profound enlightenment experience where he had massive downloads about how everything from God to the universe worked. And I've got all of his material and studied it for years. And so I was just mentioning that because you might find some of what Walter Russell shares very useful to your work. But another thing that comes to my mind is something that Einstein said. So when we're talking about our ability to access the 0-point field, Einstein said the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. So when we're looking at the material universe, it's really sort of a frothing up, a manifestation like foam on ocean waves, and that the field, i.e. the ocean, is really what's driving this thing. So I think some of these concepts are things that are a lot of so-called science minds they have their nose too close to the screen to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like when you're deep meditation, or if you're in a plant medicine space, you feel it on a sensual, affective level. And that is how we are meant to comprehend the infinite greatness of things, if we're courageous enough to do it, because it's absolutely terrifying to dissolve into the vastitude, right?
Oh, yes.
And yet our hearts can hold it somehow, and our heart is really spiritual. Yeah. I mean, can they? I know mine has been closed for decades, and it's terrifying when your heart starts to open. For all those years, it's calcified over like the pineal gland, and so it's the work we're here to do if we choose to do it. But it can be very challenging. It's safer to live in this really dead world, right? It's more like self-medication or ideological fluoride, right? The materialism.
Well, I'll throw you sort of a sideways concept here. Steiner basically said consciousness is the source of almost all disease. And what he was saying is, if you're unconscious, then you don't have ideas or concepts or beliefs that disrupt the natural flow of the creative process of the universe, which inherently does not produce the kinds of imbalances that we see in human beings. So, for example, if you know there's a pandemic and you're scared to death, you're going to have all sorts of health problems because you're aware of it or you believe it, even if it's not true. But if you're a hermit living in the mountains, there's probably millions and millions of people on the planet right now that haven't even got a concept of the pandemic or the dangers of 5G and vaccinations, because they're just completely detached. So there's no connection to it there. So, I think that these are some real concepts that are worthy of consideration.
Absolutely.
On page 89 of Regenerate, you state that protein synthesis consumes about 75% of a cell's energy. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how various diets, such as being a vegetarian or hardcore meat eater or any range in between, influences cell protein production, energy costs, and the biochemistry of the body.
Yeah, you pointed out a part of the book that might not yet be fully integrated into some of the deeper concepts that we're actually talking about right now. Because at least from a conventional perspective, the concept of how eukaryotic species have become so incredibly beautiful and complex. Let's look at the peacock. I'm here in Miami, and whenever I see a peacock, I just feel such joy and wonder. I mean, I just cannot believe that this thing exists. And the very conventional explanation for it is that because mitochondria power eukaryotic cells with 200,000 times more energy than a prokaryotic cell, which have no mitochondria, that is why there's all this excess energy for complex protein synthesis. And to maintain it, it costs a lot to be so beautiful, right? So
there's a lot of truth in that.
Especially someone who's worked on their body for so many years, you probably can identify. But so anyway, so that viewpoint is very valid. It's a little bit limited, and I think it might even be precluded by some of the deeper truths, but that we've touched on here. But when it comes to what the right diet is for individuals, I think what you struck on earlier is true, which is the belief in what we're capable of actually infuses into our orthorexic models of what the right diet is. So it could be from veganism all the way to paleo or the carnivore diet. For people that believe that this is healthy, that belief is orders of magnitude probably more powerful, preemptive than the actual physiology of what's happening. So it makes everything so complex and arbitrary to me. First of all, I don't believe there is a right diet for any specific person. And I believe, like your colleague in the Sundance, the breatharianism is something all of us are capable of. I mean, I've gone on 7-day water fasts, and there's times in my life where I realize, wow, I'm just eating out of pure recreation, and I'm probably only alive despite the good things I'm eating, right?
Yeah.
Now I know that our body, like look at the heart, not a pump, all right, has pump-like aspects, but the ATP lasts 7 seconds, and we have to pump the couple liters of fluid through 100,000 miles of tubing, and we're being told that the heart is doing this. This is being created through, obviously, the structured water or easy zone, where the cells of our body, which are 99% water by number of molecules, are taking in the ambient infrared energy, and it's driving the pump, if you will. So everything we're learning about energy right now, about how our body actually works, it just completely undermines all these old assumptions.
Yeah, Steiner described that the heart was not a pump probably around 1900. And it's interesting that you mentioned a peacock. It triggered me. I got to tell you something pretty wild. We just moved into our new home, and we have 14.5 acres here in Fallbrook, California, and it's really beautiful. But the other day, I was taking stuff to the dumpster on my little Gator, which is like a mini kind of 4-wheel workhorse vehicle. And my son and I were just unloading stuff in the dumpster, and all of a sudden I turned around, and there was the most amazing, big, beautiful peacock standing 5 feet from me on the property, and a tail about 6 feet long, and it was stunningly beautiful. And even my little 4-year-old boy said, "Daddy, that bird is beautiful." And I'm like, where did this thing come from? It just blew my mind. And
that is auspicious. They are very sacred.
Yeah, and it was, it got scared because of the sound of the Gator, the little tractor vehicle, and it was trying to push its head through the fence to get out. So my son and I walked over and opened the gate and let it run off of our property. But it's also interesting that the peacock in alchemy is a symbol of enlightenment. It's a symbol of the union of the male and the female.
Wow.
One who becomes one with source. So it's just funny that you, of all birds, mentioned that, and I just had this peacock experience a few days ago, so I had to share that.
Yeah, it has profound meaning too, of course, within the Indian pantheon of goddesses and gods, and yeah, it's just so jaw dropping. I mean, honestly, Kelly, my wife, does that for me. She's a peacock to me. Like I just melt, and in awe at the beauty she embodies. And I love, that's what I feel we need more than anything, is nature connects us to the true substrate of ethicality, which is a felt experience of awe, joy, connection, gratitude, wanting to preserve that and to know that it exists. And everything about the agendas that are being rolled out is about destroying that. Like for the everyday person, now, of course, with Agenda 21 or whatever it's now called, 2030, the elite, so to speak, want to preserve that for themselves, which I get the instinct there. But the point is that, man, those experiences are everything, you know?
Yeah. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure. Yes.
Actually, if we can get to two, because the
yeah, we're good.
The second one is one I really want to hear your thoughts on. Personally, I feel that hormones are the interface between source energy, our subtle energy fields, and the biological systems and cells of the body. I see all sorts of hormonal imbalances created from diet imbalances and lifestyle imbalances, and each such imbalance has an effect on the psyche of the individual because any imbalances manifest in alterations of the flow of energy and information coming into the individual and the feedback loop of the cosmos. In other words, if your diet and lifestyle is creating imbalances within your biochemistry or your hormonal system, it's actually, if you think of the psyche like a mirror, and imbalances in the hormonal system, like what happens if you bend a mirror, how it makes you fatter or long and skinny. My experience and my research and my philosophy is that, look, one of the reasons you got to care for your body is because if you don't eat well and live in accordance with the laws of nature, there's a certain point at which you're going to distort the hormonal system to the point you can no longer interface with the subtle energies of the psyche, such as the emotional aspects, the mental field or the noosphere, or the causal sphere of the soul. I'm just curious, what's your concepts in that regard, and what do you feel about this kind of concept I'm proposing?
Well, I really think it's compelling and intriguing. When I think of hormones, they're sort of like sacred elixirs, that exist. That, as you say, like I see it more in terms of mirror as well. So because there was such a push for a while for hormone replacement, both synthetic and then of course later just through bioidentical, I still didn't really like the fact that there was there's always a negative feedback loop with these hormones, and that this getting to the point of acknowledging the interface between, say, kidney jing, inherited qi, and why you might be dealing with adrenal insufficiency. Not to say there isn't also obviously all the other components of the physical reasons why we might be depleted or see endocrine disruption. So I don't know. I honestly, it's a really profound question, and I don't even feel like I'm able to answer it adequately. But I do acknowledge, for me, like, for example, as a 47-year-old man, if I don't keep my energy within myself in certain ways and recirculate it, then I see a profound deprivation. Like, I can get very exhausted. So, as you grow, right? As you grow older, Tantra becomes something you just do because it works. And, so I acknowledge that there's a hormonal component to that. And if I expend too much of my essence, if you will, then I can really get into a bad place. So, but you seem to be far more versed on the hormone piece than me.
Well, I've studied it quite a lot, and there's lots of examples I could give, but because you're short on time, maybe I'll save it for another conversation. But these are the kinds of things I go through in great depth with my holistic lifestyle coaching students, so they understand why we practice nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement as our 6 foundation principles, and how these principles all are basically cybernetic. You affect the breathing, you affect everything else. You alter nutrition, you alter everything else. You alter sleep. So, it's like a spider's web. You cannot pull on one part of it without affecting the entire web. But just, this is there's lots of questions I'd love to get into with you, but I'll certainly be happy to do as many podcasts as it takes for you and I to finish our dialogue. But
same here. Yes.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the research of that David Wilcock presents in his book Source Code Investigations and his Gaia TV program Wisdom Teaching with regard to the shifts in cosmic background energy and the emergence of altered or new species on the planet, showing that the Darwinian model of gene evolution is both wrong and that punctuated evolution in species can be accounted for by the influence of such environmental shifts of energy and information, such as when the Earth, as it travels through space, enters different zones of energy under influence of different star systems or even planetary bodies. And he shows lots of research from Russian scientists and various other scientists that were able to do things like run an electrical current through a duck egg into a chicken egg and produce a creature that was half duck and half chicken, or take a salamander and make changes in the salamander's structure only by using energy transfer with electrical current. Where are you at with these concepts as far as understanding, or what are your thoughts on this regard?
I love it. I years ago ran into chronoastrobiology, which is an interesting new discipline that is looking at sort of that larger context, because, with Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic fields, it's such a novel, wonderful way to help understand like what maybe wouldn't be visible otherwise. Yeah. But then you tie it in with the extraterrestrial components, which is such a misused term. It's so loaded, but the reality is that we are in a solar system, in a universe. So we should be able to speak about it without tinfoil hats, So yes, I think that there's something very profound here. As I started to explore an alternative timeline for the quote origin of the species, which I think is a question anyone would love to really go into. I'm a philosopher, and so for me, that's always been part of the whole discipline of asking, like, what is reality? Who am I? What is a human? We have to go back, and there are all these cataclysmic events that have occurred that have just erased cultural memory, other than, of course, the megaliths leaving the story there so coded. And so as I've gone backward, I've had to profoundly revise my concept about how we originated. And so I'm not familiar with that aspect of his work at all. So it's very compelling, but I imagine what it's about. And I think you bringing this up is really, it's great. I think this is a really important part of figuring out where we're going and who we are. So I'm actually appreciate you bringing this up.
I think if you either read or listen to the audio of his book, Source Code Investigations, it's loaded with excellent research that you can track right down. His Gaia TV program, Wisdom Teachings, shows all sorts of studies and gives you the direct references so you can look them up yourself. But it definitely is what he's presenting is much more in line with quantum science than it is the standard scientific kind of paradigm. And for spiritual reasons, not only do I find it more truthful, but it matches a lot of the things I find when I study people that have invented free energy technologies like Nikola Tesla and Keeley and some of the other guys that really built stuff like perpetual motion machines and all sorts of stuff the government quickly confiscated from them. But anyhow, I don't want to destroy your day by going too long. Unfortunately, we had, for those of you listening, we had a long series of technical problems with the internet today. So a lot of my time and Sayer's time was lost trying to figure out how to reconnect and record. We actually had to switch systems. But Sayer, I always love what you're putting out, and I really enjoy talking to you. And I'm going to save my list of questions we didn't get to, and let's do a part 2 of this interview, because we can easily fill another hour plus just on the remaining questions. To end, though, could you share on anything that you would like to share or direct people to, or anything that you want to close with?
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, I so appreciate you. And I mean, after this conversation, I feel like I have such a soul, kindred brother here. And so I also have a number of questions I'd love to ask you, and we can just continue this dialogue. As far as resources, so GreenMedInfo is a core project of mine. However, my wife and I are combining forces for our platform together, which is known as Vital Life Project, and it's a membership where we have sort of an intentional, smaller community, because in the realms that we traffic in, we have over 1 million followers, which is, it sounds great, but it's not, honestly, because when you're in the realm of publishing and you're open to the world in the way we are, inadvertently, it's almost like you become a politician, because all these people are upset when you say something, someone in the right? It's like, either way, I alienate almost everybody every time I put something out. And I'm at the point where, you know what, I just want to invite a few people into my life that maybe will benefit, and we can grow together. And it's sort of a walled garden, and it's safer, basically. So we'll be doing lives together, and we're working a lot on bringing our relationship into our work, because that's been the most powerful catalyst for my own evolution. And I'd love to have a conversation with you eventually too, because you're such a unique individual, and you hold a pillar here in the space of masculinity and trying to define what that is moving forward. So that I'm really excited about that prospect with you. But I also have a nonprofit organization I co-founded called Stand for Health Freedom, standforhealthfreedom.com. It's a 501c4, and it's actually designed to really empower everyone with the tools, the software needed to directly connect with their legislators, lawmakers, so to send clear messages when it comes to reopening America. For example, we put together all the facts and all of the compelling reasons constitutionally why what they were doing was disproportionately harming law-abiding, healthy citizens, and wasn't actually having an impact on reducing morbidity and mortality related to COVID. So we were able to articulate all this action. I believe it had a significant effect, and we're just basically creating that tool for people. So I encourage those to visit that. And then finally, Kelly and I have been helping people get information out. So there's a project out there called questioningcovid.com, and it includes testimony from clinicians, scientists, policymakers, whistleblowers on what's actually happening with this psychological operation, which I would call the new 9/11, because it will forever change the course of global history. And it is a direct assault against our basic human and constitutionally protected freedoms in this country. So I really hope that it will help wake people up.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And by the way, I don't think you're nearly busy enough. I should probably send you some things to do.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, this is one of the things that I chose to do because I so appreciate your work, and I enjoy it. So this is really what I want to do more of moving forward.
Yeah, well, lovely. Listen, I've had a great time talking with you and sharing with you, and forgive us, everybody, if the recording quality isn't as good as it usually is. We did our very best. It was just one of those days where we had to kind of practice our Taoist, stay in the middle, not get too wound up, and just roll with it. So, Sayer, my love and appreciation for all that you're doing, my love and appreciation for your wife and all she's doing, and for the harmony and beauty of your relationship, because it's clearly the two of you together are producing a lot of great stuff for the world. I know, I have 2 wives, and my women and we have tremendous harmony, and a lot of great things happen that would never happen with us individually. So I know the power of partnership. And I think in closing, I would say that we all need to get together and become a family again, and really identify the values that are essential for our own sustainability, which depends upon the sustainability of the planet. And I think when we realize that the foundation of life is not money, it is life and love and awareness of the connection and the need that each of the supportive species or beings have in the great chain of being. And if we don't protect what gives us the opportunity to have a body, to have the human experience, well, then we're simply going to, have a sort of a sad story come to an end at some point here, because we can't really push the subsystems too much harder. I mean, the oceans are dying, the skies are poisoned, the rivers are poisoned. I mean, the list is very, very long, and it's a question of, is it really wise to be playing video games and watching porn and smoking a lot of pot when you really need to be contributing to the movement of sharing education, sharing love, and sharing wisdom to help other people have a more holistic perspective before we don't have a chance to do anything but go into pure survival mode?
I love it. Exactly. Because, when it comes to authenticity around terms like sustainability, I'm only now realizing just how dependent I've been on the system and how I co-created this whole operation, right? That feels like it's an assault upon me. And like you look at the UN's use of the word sustainable goals, and it's so Orwellian. And so what we need to do is live in an authentic way so that we're embodying these principles and it's infusing all aspects of our life. So I feel we're on the same wavelength, my friend, and I'm so honored to be, your friend and for us to grow this family together.
Absolutely. Well, I just interviewed Aubrey Marcus, and I shared a quote from Carl Jung with him that I think is very appropriate now. Jung said, "No man is fully alive until he has the power to destroy himself." So based on Jung's deep wisdom, we should all be fully alive right now because we have more than enough power to destroy ourselves and the planet in many, many ways. So we can either see this as so much shock, so much fear that it disables us and makes us just lay down and play dead like an ostrich burying its head in the sand, or we can say, hey, we've got a worldwide art project. Let's make something beautiful together, and let's dance, sing, and party our way into healing the garden and getting rid of the lines on paper that we fight for and spend trillions of dollars to defend because they're all illusions anyhow.
Amen. Wow. Another poet warrior in the house. I love it. I'll sign up for that vision. Sign me up.
All right. Well, I'm signed up to GreenMedInfo. I check it every day when it comes through, and I really am grateful for everything you're doing, and it was a blessing to be able to share you with the Living 4D audience. So keep up the great work, and any chance we have to get together or you want to talk or do interviews for anything, let me know.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Paul. We'll do.
Lots of love.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, Saya G. You can find Saya's book, Regenerate, Unlocking Your Body's Radical Resilience Through the New Biology, on Amazon. Connect with him on Instagram at GreenMedInfo or at SayaGMI. Visit his website at greenmedinfo.com, and there you can grab a copy of his special report, Nature's Pharmacy, Evidence-Based Alternatives to Drugs, 500 plus pages of natural medicine alternatives, by subscribing to his newsletter at greenmedinfo.com/newsletter. Follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living4D Podcast or on his podcast YouTube channel, youtube.com/Living4D with Paul Chek. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and at the Chek Institute's brand new streaming media site, Chekiva.com. Eva.com. 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 Eva.com.